Well, hello there. We're back, and so are you. Welcome back. I'm Charlie.
Linda Bloom. Hi, everybody.
And today we're going to be looking at a very important question that those of you who have children probably have confronted a number of times in your life and in your relationship. And those of you who have been children might also benefit from this talk too. The rest don't need to pay any attention. So the question is, who comes first? The kids or the relationship? In other words, when you're in one of those positions where it seems like you've got these conflicting intentions and needs, and kids are pulling on you for something, or your child is, and at the same time you feel an obligation that conflicts with that in terms of your relationship. Where do you go? What do you choose? So we're not going to, as we often do not do, we're not going to tell you what you should do here, because the real answer to that question is it depends. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of things that it depends upon. But we're going to just help you to become more aware of some of the things that you might want to take into consideration when you find yourself, not if, but when you find yourself in that position.
But what we do want to do is to prompt you to live in the question for a while. Sometimes when we ask the questions, we don't expect people to have the answer just like that. But we want to encourage people to have it at the edges of their imagination, so they're doing an assessment of the choices that they're making and how they're living, and whether that's really working for them presently, and whether they see it as being sustainable over the long term. And we've written about this both in the form of a blog and as a chapter in our very first book, 101 Things That I Wish I Knew When I Got Married. And we got a lot of responses from both the chapter in the book and the blog that people have very strong feelings about this. And some people feel like the children must always come first. And if you fall into that kind of a pattern and you neglect the needs of the romantic partnership, it may come to bite you on the behind later, that you can get away with it for a while. And some people make this choice consistently. And both parents might be in agreement about that while they're raising the kids needs always have to come first. And they may not see that eventually those kids are going to leave, and they may not have fostered the kind of bond and rapport with each other that's really sustainable over the long term for them to thrive during the time that they're raising the kids and later when the kids leave. So I want you to see where you stand on this. And we certainly are not encouraging anybody to be neglectful or irresponsible about their children. We do need to make a lot of revisions as the kids get older, and let them go and let them try things out and make some mistakes and learn from their own mistakes. If we hover over them too closely, they don't get to really grow in their own strength and confidence and self-trust. So we want people to be balanced about the way in which they're cognizant of the children's needs and meeting them, also their own individual needs and meeting those, and the needs of the romantic partnership, and to take good care of that too.
Yeah, we're all kind of subject to our own unique circumstances when we were growing up, and the kind of environment that we grew up in, and the values of our family. And that has had an impact on all of us. You can't help but in some ways respond to whatever the values of your own parents were when you were growing up, and either feel that is the right way to do it, and to kind of model yourself after them and bring those same preferences into your adult relationships. Or, if you feel like they missed the boat, or you wish that they had been more attentive on one side or the other, then you might take the opposite stance and have that predisposition. So somebody who came from a family in which both parents were so devoted to each other that the kids were neglected, and they were kind of felt like they were on the back burner and they didn't matter that much. They are going to grow up with a different perspective than a child who grew up in a family in which he was the little prince or she was the little princess who always got what daddy wanted to give her or what she wanted from daddy or from mommy. And the primary connection was with one of the parents, often the parent of the opposite sex. And so we're going to bring those preferences, those predispositions into our adult relationships. And we want to look at what some of the benefits and pros and cons are of being on either side of that. And what some of the red flags might be that might tell you that your perspective might need to be balanced with some more consideration for the other side.
There's some really significant pitfalls that can show up. They don't show up necessarily right away. They can show up later when the child's a little older. Some kids, when they've been so doted on, do you know that they have a sense of entitlement, that the world owes them a living, and they don't have a sense that they need to earn their way. So that's one of the pitfalls that comes with children being indulged. Another one is that when the marital relationship is neglected and doesn't get its needs met, that the children can pick up their little tuning forks and they can pick up the resentment or the loneliness or the sadness or whatever the discomfort is that's in the atmosphere, that the parents aren't really happy with each other. So the idea that they form in their mind about committed partnership and marriage is that it's kind of grim, that it isn't really a fun place to be. So it might not show up when the kids are small, but it might show up later when it comes their turn to have a committed partnership. They may be reluctant to enter into one because they've got a negative association with it. And I want to define the term functional family. A functional family is one in which all the needs of every member in the family are addressed and met, generally speaking. A dysfunctional family can be when the parents' needs are met, but the children's needs are not, or maybe one of the children's needs are met to the exclusion of other children of the family, or it could be one of the parents, their needs are met to the exclusion of the other partner or the children. So it's a piece of work to have everybody's needs known, out in the open, and met, both the adult level and the kids level.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, to clarify that we're not saying that everyone is responsible for meeting everyone else's needs, or that that the parents are obligated to make sure that the children's needs are all met. I mean, that is, of course, true when children are young, but like Linda said, as they get older, we want to give them increasingly more responsibility for recognizing what their job is in terms of making themselves happy or fulfilling needs that they have, and what they can depend upon their parents for. So at the beginning of the game, when they're just born, it's 100% that the parents are responsible for making sure that the kids' well-being is absolutely at the highest priority. And that is also the time at which most the relationships that get in trouble, the marriages that get in trouble, that's the most common time for for that to happen. And within the first year of a child's birth, the first child's birth, is when marriages are most vulnerable to having real trouble, real difficulty, and divorce. So, that's because there hasn't been an adequate preparation or anticipation of what it's going to require to have this person's life and well-being in the hands of somebody who has not previously had that responsibility. And so that's something that we really want to make sure at that point. We want to do everything that we can do to provide for that. And then, of course, as children become older and they become more social and they start looking more to their peers and outside of the family, that need to be so dominant in their life well-being begins to diminish, and we can hopefully begin to withdraw some of that and allow them to be more free and more responsible to do some of the things that they couldn't do when they were younger.
So I want to tell you a little story, and this is the story of Stefan and Betty. And when the children were very small, Stefan got his needs completely out of the way, and he thought just when they're babies, of course, Betty needs to be completely devoted to them, but they got off on a bad foot because he didn't speak up. And then the children got a little older, and he expected Betty to let up about being quite so concerned with the children, and expected her to come back and pay a little attention to him, to listen to him, to converse with him. They didn't go on date night, and he started to speak up. And it got to be very argumentative between them. And she would say, "You're not very involved, and you don't even seem like you love your children. You don't care about them." And he says, "Of course I care about my children. I love my children. I feel like I have to back off a little bit because you do everything for them. They're getting big now. You even butter their toast at breakfast."
And Billy is 39 years old. I think it's about time that he learned how to dress himself.
And they had 100 arguments about the same thing. And then she would accuse him of being uncaring, and he would accuse her of keeping the children dependent. You're weakening them. Why don't you let them learn from their experiences? Let the kids grow up. You let them make a mistake. And they did this even when the kids were in high school. And he never really got through to her, and she was closed to hearing it. Well, the kids left home, and they were stuck with each other and these years of, unhappiness. They did not split up. They didn't divorce. They were afraid to go out on their own, but they weren't happy. They just stayed together miserable. Now, this is in sharp contrast to Michael and Jane, who also had difficulty with their kids. These weren't even their own biological kids. It was a blended family. They got together when one of the girls, the daughter, was 5 and the other daughter was 6. But Michael and Jane made a pact with each other that they were committed to each other, and they were going to do whatever they could to strengthen their bond. And so one of the girls, Lauren, was out to break them up. And she was just a little girl, but she was a powerful force. And she was on a campaign to split them up because she wanted her dad to go back with her mom. And she had the fantasy that she could break them up and reunite her original biological parents. And she really ran her number hard, and she created all kinds of disturbance. And at first, Michael would take the child's part, and he didn't quite trust how Jane was handling it when she was giving the child feedback that this was not acceptable. But he came to trust Jane over time, and they stood united. They made decisions that they were going to go on vacations every other year, just the two of them, for a romantic getaway. They weren't going to take the kids on the vacation with them every time. Over the years of their standing united and creating a really exemplary, harmonious, fabulous relationship where they delighted in each other. The daughter who was contrary did come around. The kids are grown now. Both of the daughters are grown and have children of their own. And that daughter who hated Jane's guts is really close to her now and calls her all the time for advice about parenting. So this one had a happy ending story. And both Jane and Michael were very clear when they were telling us their story that they see the secret to success of their blended family was because they stood united, and they thought that it was putting their marriage first before the needs of the children. Not far away, they were devoted parents too, to both the child and their stepchild, and to Michael, the child that they had afterward. But they put their marriage first, and they said that was the secret to having the whole thing work.
Now, that doesn't mean that every time there was an apparent conflict or difference between the requirements of the marriage and the requirements of the children, that they always chose the marriage. It depends upon what the circumstances are. There are going to be times when it is appropriate and necessary to put the needs of the children ahead of the marriage for a time being. And one of the things that Michael and Jane told us was that they kept in mind that they always wanted, if there were situations in which if it felt like they had to temporarily borrow from one to give to the other, that they would make that up, that they would in some way provide an experience that would reaffirm to the kids that they were right up there at the top of the priority list along with the marriage, but that they were able to do that in a way that didn't diminish their commitment to either one. So that's the challenge. You know, when we get into a committed partnership, we're now responsible for not the other person, but for something that didn't exist before. We are responsible for the degree to which we promote and support the health and well-being of the relationship. And that has to become a high priority when we do that. Otherwise, our other pre-existent commitments are going to continue to take the lion's share of everything, and our relationship is going to wither and perhaps even die of neglect, which happens to be the primary reason that relationships fail. Marriages don't succeed. It's not because people just don't get along. What happens more frequently, the more frequent cause of a deterioration of a relationship is neglect. And that can easily happen when another element is brought into the relationship that requires more attention. If you've got a special needs child, then that person is going to require more than the other kids in the family do in order to fulfill those needs. But that doesn't mean that you can get away with neglecting the other children, or you can neglect the other things that are important in your life, like your work or your relationship with your partner. So we can end up having multiple responsibilities. And fortunately, you don't have to be fully developed in the area of holding responsibility before you take that step into creating a relationship, into creating a family, into creating a career. You don't have to, even though those are things that ultimately you're going to have to be responsible for if you choose that route. And like we have said many, many times, we are not saying that this is the royal road to fulfillment and happiness and success. This is not for everybody.
Right.
Committed partnership and family is not for everybody. And a lot of us know people, or maybe even have been in families with people who probably would have been better off if they hadn't made that choice.
Mhm.
Or maybe we would have been better off if they had, who knows? Or we wouldn't have been here maybe. But the point is that we're not saying that this is for everybody to do, to take on all of these commitments and responsibilities. Linda and I know many people who are living single lives who are very fulfilled and very satisfied. And we happen to have chosen this path. And I'm kind of glad that I didn't know just how much responsibility it was going to require, 50 years ago when we first got into relationship with each other, because there's no doubt in my mind that if I had seen a picture of this, I would have gone, whoa, no way. Don't even think about that. But, I'm glad I didn't know, because I'm glad that I did what I did, that I made the choices, because things have really, for the most part, really turned out well. But, you've got to keep your eyes open, and you've got to be willing to be flexible and to be committed at the same time, and to keep your priorities in order.
So if you do make the choice to do marriage and family, to make sure that you keep tuned in to each member, see what their needs are, and see if, generally speaking, over time, everybody's needs are getting met, and not to regress and neglect the romantic partnership. Because I'm absolutely convinced that one of the greatest gifts that we give our kids is a model and an example of a working partnership, where people handle their differences well, where they delight in each other, where they learn from each other, where they enjoy each other, where there's cooperation and co-collaboration and co-creativity. These are all really important to be able to model to our children. And we can feel a sense of satisfaction when they enter their own adulthood, that we gave our best to model that partnership can be splendid and wonderful. Now, it doesn't guarantee that they won't have their own path and that they'll have struggles in their partnerships too. They've got their own, learning to do, but at least we've done our part to be able to do that. And so I'm from the school of thought that it's dangerous to suffer in silence. If you're feeling lonely for your partner, if you're feeling marginalized, if you're feeling that your partner may be giving too much attention to the children and too concerned about their needs and not concerned enough about the well-being of the partnership, speak up. Don't do it in a blamey, complaining, whiny way. Do it in a responsible way. Invite them to take a look at this with you and see, because they may not be suffering the way you are. They not lonely the way you are. Maybe they're so satisfied in their parental role that they're getting really nourished in a deep way, but you might be the one that needs a bit more attention paid to the needs of the romantic partnership. And more responsibility falls to the person who feels it first to speak up about it and to voice their concern and invite their partner into a collaboration about how the adjustment can be made.
Yeah, and looking at the other side of that same coin, if one of you happens to be more attuned to the level to which the children's needs are being provided for, and you feel that they are at risk of or are being neglected in some way, then it's just as important for you to bring that to the attention of your partner, so that the two of you can really look at this. And perhaps you may have different views on this, but just having a conversation about your concerns and looking at how you can both deal with that in a way that does satisfy any anxiety that you might have about the children's perhaps being neglected, or being, like in the first example that Linda used, being overindulged, because that can be dangerous too. You know, if a child grows up feeling like they are extra special, and that it's wonderful to have a high sense of self-esteem, but there's a difference between self-esteem and what's the word?
Inflation?
Inflation, grandiosity, narcissism. And sometimes when children are treated as though they really are the little prince or princess, they can have a sense of entitlement that that's what they expect from every relationship. And some of you may know what it's like, if you've ever had a dose of that, to have that expectation and then find out that the world isn't going to treat you the way daddy treated you or the way mama treated you. And that's kind of part of growing up, is that to see, yeah, you can be very, very special in the eyes of your parents, but if you don't learn to also balance that with a certain degree of humility, which does come from the acceptance of responsibility for yourself, then you're going to be setting yourself up for a lot of disappointment.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't want that to happen to the kids either.
Now, one of the rationalizations and the justifications that I have heard for the people who make the children's needs so central at their life that the partnership gets short shrift is, oh, when the kids are grown, we'll have plenty of time then. And when we'll go traveling and we'll spend time together, and we'll really enjoy our relationship then. So they're putting it off till later. And, you know, if you spend years imagining that you're going to get to it later, you might not even like that person. You might not even know that person. You might not be enjoying that person by the time that comes, because you may have felt so neglected and so resentful that you've got a bad case of, I don't want to go anywhere with you, that you've been living parallel lives, getting your needs met elsewhere just a little bit too long. So if you have that kind of an idea in your mind, you know, really look deeply into it about whether you're putting something off, because sometimes people don't have good emotional intimacy skills and good negotiation skills, and they hide behind the kids and their needs because they don't want to go into an arena where they don't feel really competent.
Mm-hmm.
And so we invite people to get your skill level up and get your competency level up and really co-create the kind of relationship that was doing well. So by the time the kids fly the nest, you can really say, oh boy, let's just enjoy it some more, because I dig you and I know you, and I really am glad that we've got this time and money to spend on lavishing it on ourselves now.
Yeah, it's payoff time. So if you want to keep those relationship skills growing, keep watching these videos, and you'll be amazed at how quickly you're going to become an expert at fulfilling these emotional needs.
And tell your friends so you can support each other.
Right. Speaking of which, we're going to be talking next time we speak, which is going to be 2 weeks from today, because next Thursday is Thanksgiving. So happy Thanksgiving to everybody. And I hope that you use some of the things that you're learning from these talks when you're with some of your friends and relatives next Thursday, particularly those who can be, let's say, challenging to be around. I don't know if you have any people like that in your life, but some people do. But the next time we speak will be 2 weeks from today, and we're going to be talking about emotional intimacy and ways in which to build it and to strengthen it. So don't miss that talk.
And if you haven't signed up to be on our email list, we're giving away completely free of charge 3 valuable ebooks. They're about 10 chapters each, and I think you'll really enjoy them. And please tell your friends about them. Happy holiday.